and she's not allowed to enter into the underworld with these temporary protections, and she enters the underworld completely naked, and then is faced with the dark ruler of the underworld, this being that even just being in sight of her kills Inanna, and Inanna dies.
Welcome to the Feminine Alchemy podcast, where we explore the truth about the feminine, the peaceful, the wild, and the visceral. I'm your host, J.N. Behringer, joined by my co-hosts, Julie Dean Richards and Kaylee Rose. Each week, we explore the deep mysteries of the feminine and help listeners apply them to their daily lives in a practical way. Join us to unlock the hidden wisdoms your soul has been waiting for.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Feminine Alchemy. I am so excited. I have an amazing guest here with me. Meg, I'm going to make you say your last name because it's real hard for me.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. So it's Meg Rittmanic.
Okay, Meg Rittmanic. She is magical. Meg is the co-host of a podcast called In Her Image. It's a podcast where they seek to celebrate Heavenly Mother through scholarship, the arts, and everyday life. Meg is a seeker of truth and loves searching for missing puzzle pieces connected to the divine feminine. She's currently working on a book to help people understand the story of the divine feminine in scripture. Meg is a mother of 3 kids, and her mothering journey led her to encounter healing experiences because of divine interventions by her mother God. She has a deep appreciation for the miracles she has seen in her life because of her Heavenly Mother. How beautiful. What a great bio. And I would love to start out this podcast today just asking you a little bit about that journey. How did you get introduced to, or how did you start seeking the divine feminine?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it was an unexpected thing, actually. Let's see, my journey kind of starts at a very young age. I was always really spiritual. I remember having conversations with God and just always seeking and wanting to know more about spiritual things. And I put lots of effort into my spiritual life as a child and a teenager and as a young adult. And then I went through some really traumatic experiences that kind of led me to question my relationship with God. And I will say that my relationship with God was with a primarily masculine God all through my childhood. And that was all I was really familiar with. And I was completely obsessed with this relationship. I relied on God for everything. I believed that I was being guided and that my life was full of divine intervention. And that helped bring a lot of security into my life until I started kind of descending into the dark night of the soul and experiencing a major faith crisis. And this faith crisis ushered in an extreme amount of anxiety because I just didn't understand where my life was going anymore. I didn't feel like I had that support to just feel safe in the world anymore. And I kind of went on a spiritual roller coaster for about 10 years. And during that period of time, I had 2 children. And with my second daughter, experienced postpartum depression that was absolutely soul crushing. It's just a very dark time in my life. And I wasn't really able to function as a normal human being. And I found myself wishing to die on a daily basis. It was truly the most horrible experience, and I would never wish it upon anyone. After 3 years of experiencing this just truly horrid life, I found out that I was pregnant with another child. And that really put me into an even more extreme tailspin. I believed that if I tried to bring another child into this world, that I would die. I felt like, even to a more extreme point, that like God just did not care about me and that I had been completely abandoned. It was at this point that I started having interactions with the divine feminine. It first happened with a voice that told me that I needed to make some different choices. At the time, I was early in my pregnancy and I was considering an abortion, which I felt like was necessary and needed with the state of mind that I was in. And this is a really difficult thing for me to talk about.
Yeah, I wanted to say thanks for being so open and vulnerable with us and sharing that, because I do think a lot of women, like I personally know women who have been deep in this position of feeling like, man, it's not worth it, or, you know, having deep, really difficult thoughts with postpartum depression and being in this space where I can't be a mother again, or even suicidal ideation, or these thoughts about I can't have another child again, I need to have an abortion. I know people who have struggled with this. And so I think it's very brave of you to be so vulnerable and tell your story with us, and just know that we're listening and not judging any of your thoughts or anything. And just thank you for sharing with us. Please continue.
Yeah. Well, I do feel like it's important to be authentic and to talk about hardship, to talk about those scars that we bear. You know, I'm a Christian, so I'm going to talk about Christ in this podcast. And one thing that's really interesting is that after Christ was resurrected, he still had his scars from the crucifixion. And he carried those as a sign of what he had been through. And a lot of us in life, we go through horrible things that are hard and difficult, but we don't have anything outward to show how much suffering we are either currently going through or that we have gone through in our life, that kind of can tell people like, here's me. And so it takes being authentic and sharing those things to be able to open up and show the pain that we have experienced. And I think that symbol of those scars is a good reminder of that. Is like almost wearing your heart on your sleeve and being open and honest about those kinds of things. Anyway, back to the story. At that time, I was told that I couldn't go through with what I was considering. And it just made me more angry, honestly. I was so upset. I just was like, okay, well, then I'll have this child and I'll die. Like, you obviously don't care about me. I was not in a good place mentally. And I recognized the voice as a distinctly feminine voice. But at the time, I just thought maybe it was a heavenly messenger, maybe a grandparent or an angel or something like that was trying to intervene. But as time progressed, and looking back, I realized it was Mother God who was reaching to me and had a plan to help me heal and to bring me into a place where all of my dreams could come true and that I could be pulled out of all the darkness that I was experiencing. So things started falling into place. I had several other experiences. One where I was meditating, and this meditation, I visually saw myself like leave my body and float up. And I went and sat on a cloud with this woman, and I didn't know who she was. And I saw myself down below me, just curled up, fetal position, surrounded in darkness, like spiritually not alive and just suffering, right? And this woman said, like, what do you see? And I explained what I was seeing. And she said, well, can I show you what I see in you? And so then I looked down and I saw myself very strong, standing up, like holding the world basically above my head. And she said, "This is what I see in you. I see that you are strong. And you've had some hard things that have kind of knocked you down, but I need you to remember who you are." And so that was a good start down a path that led to a lot of healing, but it was just a start, honestly. I had a long journey ahead of me of all kinds of things that I had to sort through and distortion that I had to release and process through. I believe that the kinds of spiritual interactions that I've had with my divine team are not exclusive to one person. I think that as we have more conversations about spiritual things and sacred things, we will come to know that these kinds of experiences are available to all of us. I would love for your listeners to listen to my full story on our podcast, which I share in detail, but it's long and we have lots of other great things to talk about today. Go and listen to it because I think it's inspiring and beautiful and very authentic. So looking back, hindsight, I would never go back. I would never want to just not have all the pain and all the heartache and all the horrible things that I experienced because it's brought me so much wisdom and so much joy that has exceeded the pain. And it also brought me Heavenly Mother into my life in a powerful way. After I had those experiences with her, I got a mother hunger, a thirst, like it was unquenchable. I wanted to know more about her. And I hadn't grown up in a tradition where that was ever talked about. At least I had never heard it talked about. I actually grew up in the same religious tradition as you, Julie. And I know some people say that they remember hearing about Heavenly Mother, but I do not. And I was a devout child. So it's not like that I wasn't participating or something that I never heard that idea. It literally just was never talked about in my community that I grew up in. And so when I had that experience, I started searching everywhere. I read every ancient text that was connected to the divine feminine that I could. I started looking at anything and everything that was connected to any kind of goddess to try to figure out who was this person that I met, that inspired me, that saved me, that put me on a path of healing and of joy, really. Joy in motherhood, which I had not experienced previously. I wanted to know everything about her that I could. And I definitely didn't look inside of my own tradition for that information because I just was like, there's no way that's part of the tradition I grew up in. Which is funny is like I've come full circle at this point. I've realized that there's actually a deep well of sacred truth to drink from about Heavenly Mother in Christianity. And it's coded. It's definitely hidden. You have to be willing to search for it and look for it in order to find those truths. But once you start looking for it and your eyes are kind of open to it, wow, it is amazing. It really is. She is such an integral part of what I call the plan of salvation, which is basically a plan that our heavenly parents put together to save us, to help us, to give us the opportunity to come here and experience life and make lots of mistakes and experience the darkness and the light and the joy and the sorrow and all of the things. She is a huge part of it, absolutely essential, and was a part of the creation and had essential parts in creating this world and has always loved us and has never abandoned us. But unfortunately, humanity through most of history has abandoned her.
If you've been craving something deeper, something sacred, something real, then this is for you. Listen, we get so much out of chatting with you on the podcast and online. We love your comments, your messages, your transformation, but it's just not the same as being together in person. We want to meet you. So we've created something incredibly special for you. We're calling it Into the Heroine's Heart. It's a 4-day women's retreat in the secluded mountains of Idaho this June the 26th through the 29th. This is more than a retreat. It's a guided descent into the most tender and powerful parts of yourself. There is magic when women gather, and with daily rituals, astrology, shadow work, cacao ceremonies, drum circles, nourishing food, and the beauty of sisterhood, you'll reconnect to your body, your heart, and your wild feminine wisdom. This is going to allow you to live the podcast instead of just listening to it. We'll be putting all the juicy, delicious, visceral things you've heard about here into living physical form. You'll sleep under the stars, share stories by the fire, and leave feeling alive, whole, and aligned. There are only 10 spots left, and actually probably less by the time this gets posted. And if you're a Feminine Alchemist member, you get $150 off. So go to the link in the show notes, click it, and begin your journey to wholeness. Please join us for this once-in-a-lifetime experience. If your heart is calling, I hope you'll answer. We'll see you there. Back to the show. Yeah, I think that's beautiful to be able to talk about and to be able to acknowledge that she's always been there, right? Like the goddess has always been there. And there are some traditions that have kept her alive, but most, like you said, have really abandoned her. And I think throughout your story, what stuck out is that she was always there waiting for you, or they were always there waiting for you, just like God and the universe is always waiting for us. And most of the time it's us that keeps ourselves far away. And we do need to go through some of these necessary trials, which is a little bit about what we're talking about today. I loved that you shared so much of your journey because it really goes along so well with Inanna's descent, which is what we're going to chat about today. And for those who don't know who Inanna is, just really quickly, she is a very, very ancient goddess. And she is one of the many archetypes about this. We can find it in so many stories, not just Inanna, but Persephone, Hecate, this idea of the journey of women, or the heroine's journey, which does start with a descent. So I would love it, Meg, if you could help us go through Inanna's journey and tell her story to us, and then we can kind of dissect what it's about and, how it applies to us as women.
Yeah, so this story is a very special story and actually came into my life right after my experiences with Heavenly Mother. And she pointed it to me to help me understand the path that I had been on and where it was leading and where I needed to go next. It's so beautiful and has so many metaphors and good things for us to learn about. And I have spent a lot of time with this story. One of the best people to get resources about the story is Pam England. I will do my best to iterate this beautiful story with you. And there are a lot of better storytellers than me in the world. If you want to go deeper with it, I definitely recommend looking at Pam England's work on the story of Inanna. The story of Inanna is actually one of the oldest stories of a goddess that exists in art and in literature. And it's there to teach us about the path that women need to take in order to gain enlightenment. And it requires a descent. So the story starts with Inanna up in heaven as the queen of heaven. And while she is there, she hears a cry from below. And she believes that in the stories, oftentimes it says that it is a sister, but archetypally, I believe that it's probably a cry from a part of her, of who she is, that she has not been willing to acknowledge or face in her life up to this point as Queen of Heaven. And she knows that she's being called on a journey and that she needs to make this journey. She has a good friend and confidant that she tells that she needs to do this. And her friend begs her not to go. Says, please do not go to the underworld. Everyone that goes there, they do not return. You'll go there and you'll die. And she says, well, I have to go. Like, I'm compelled to make this descent. But in preparation, I'm going to put on all of my armor, and I'm also going to rely on you to help me. And so she collaborates with her friend and makes a plan. She says, if I do not come back in 3 days, then I want you to go petition to the gods to come and save me, to come help me make my return. And so after all of this preparation and Inanna putting on all of her battle gear, she puts on breastplates and has all kinds of things, which with the language that was used in it, a lot of it we don't know what they're referring to. There were things like a crown, breastplates, swords, all kinds of items that she puts on. And each one is symbolic of things that we put on to protect ourselves as we go through life, thinking that this is the key to helping us get through life, right? Well, what Inanna finds is that as she makes a descent, she has to give up these different pieces of protection in order to pass through the 7 gates into the underworld. And she's not allowed to enter into the underworld with these temporary protections. And she enters the underworld completely naked. And then is faced with the dark ruler of the underworld, this being that even just being in sight of her kills Inanna, and Inanna dies. And this dark ruler of the underworld takes Inanna's corpse and hooks it onto the wall with big hooks right through her ribs and hangs her there to just rot and die. And she's there for 3 days. And her dear friend realized that something has gone terribly wrong. And so her friend goes to the gods and petitions the gods, and is actually turned away by many of the gods because they say, well, Inanna should have known. Like, she shouldn't have made this choice. Like, she's the goddess. She's the queen of heaven. Like, she knows the rules. But there is one that is compassionate towards her. And he says, well, I will, in the text, it actually says that I will send 2 devils, which is interesting because if you translate it correctly, during that time, devils really meant just like a fallen divine person, which I love threads like that. I think it's interesting to ponder on things like that. Sends these divine fallen beings, and he says, I will give them the bread of life and the water of life, and they will make the descent into the underworld, and they will feed it to Inanna, and she will be able to make her ascent back up. So these 2 fallen divine beings make their descent into the underworld, and when they come, they hear the ruler of the underworld just crying and weeping and groaning. It's the same cry that Inanna had heard. She is still suffering profoundly, and they show compassion to her. They hold her, they wipe her tears, they care for her, they offer her gifts of comfort. And in return, she says to them, what can I possibly give you in return for your kindness? And they say, well, we want to take Inanna with us. And she is not necessarily happy about this in the story. But she knows she is compelled to her side of the agreement. She said that she would do anything for them for their kindness. And so she says, okay, go ahead and take Inanna. And so they give Inanna the bread of life and the water of life. And at this time, Inanna is more than just resurrected. She is literally transfigured. She becomes an owl. She gains wings and claws and just mighty features that signify the transfiguration that she's gone through, the metamorphosis, literally like a butterfly, like everything is melted and become mush. And I'm sure that while she was in that state, it was frantic and horrible and depressing, and any descent that we may experience, if we don't get stuck in that descent, in that underworld place, which it is possible to go through experiences and to get stuck at any one of the gates, to get stuck in the underworld, to get stuck in the ascent and not make our ascent fully out. Those are all things that are possible for us to happen to us. But the story goes that she doesn't get stuck. She goes through this transfiguration, through this complete metamorphosis, and she makes her return back to as the Queen of Heaven. And I think it's really interesting to kind of break open what those different gates are, and what are the things that we release, and what are the things that we gain as we make our ascent, and how do we go through this healing journey. And that is why the story of Inanna is beautiful, is because it gives us hints towards that. But the truth is that we cannot gain the wisdom that we are meant to gain in this life without some descents into. And that is the moral of the story. And so I think a lot of times there's resistance towards facing that side of ourselves that lives in the underworld. And we don't want to go through that death. That can be very scary and hard and difficult. And I can also testify that as you make your ascent, you will be so grateful that you have gone through that. And you'll be more prepared to make other descents in your life, because you will have the tools and the understanding of what that looks like and how to approach it. So the story of Persephone, I mean, she goes into the underworld every year.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just a one-time descent.
Yeah.
It is yearly. I think it's interesting that Eve, she partook of a fruit that created descent, basically.
Well, and she fell, right? She descended because of that choice,
Exactly. Yeah. And also, we have a beautiful gift that some people may not consider a gift in their life, of a monthly cycle that literally puts us into descent every month, that really bring up to the surface the things that are not serving us as women, that need to be dealt with, and typically brings it up in such a manner that it's so in your face that everyone's like, oh, well, you just have PMS. Well, no, actually, there's probably some things that need to be dealt with. There's some descents that need to be done, and some healing that needs to be done.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think that's so beautiful. And I love the way that you told the story. And I think we could have a whole other podcast just talking about the symbolism of the 9 gates on the way in and on the way out. And we'll have to look at that. But I think starting here is so important with exactly what you're talking about. Here we have talked about the wheel of the year. I don't know if you talked about that on In Her Image, but this idea, right? The year is a wheel, and it has that descent phase, just like Persephone, right? Fall and winter, we're descending and we're being reborn in the winter to come back up in the spring and the summer. That, internally, like you said, every month we live in that wheel, and every year we live in that wheel, right? And we're going through these cycles of descending, death, rebirth, descending, death, rebirth, and it's a beautiful, beautiful cycle for every woman to come back with that piece of enlightenment, to come back with those beautiful things that you talked about, those wisdoms that she talks about. And I think it's really important what you said about getting stuck, as well as this image of Inanna. Like when you said that, there was a visceral reaction inside of me when you talked about her being pinned to the wall, and just that feeling of being stuck through and feeling like you're rotting, you're dying. And oftentimes, I think we live in a world where we would love it to just be an upward, like a straight upward line, or like we're just going upstairs easily, quickly. We're just getting enlightenment left and right and like having, you know, all these experience, but we're so afraid, I think, in this day and age of looking inward. And we talk a lot about shadow work, but like what you're talking about, looking at these pieces of you that are lost, these pieces of you that we have rejected, these pieces of you that are so hurting and wishing, and we're so scared of that rotting stage, right? Like we're so scared of that stage of dying, you know, and facing that. And this is the perfect time of year, you know, to be talking about that. And I recently have been doing that a lot myself, like sitting in this. But once you do it, I think it's not as scary as you think it is. You know, the rebirth is always worth it. And it's just knowing you're going to get to that lovely rebirth. For you, what do you feel like some of this story symbolizes? You touched on it a little bit, but what are things that women could take away from this that they could use in their own personal journeys?
Well, I think that, have you guys talked about Callie?
We haven't talked about Callie yet.
Okay, well, let's talk about Callie a little bit.
Yes, I want to talk
she's a
about
pretty
Callie.
cool goddess. She's a Hindu goddess, and she is the goddess of death. And you see pictures of her, and it is fierce. She is a warrior. She is all blue. She has crazy hair, and she usually has a necklace of skulls. And the goddess Callie is there to kill anything that is not serving us. And sometimes we have to go through little deaths. It's interesting. I was just at a seminar where we were talking about just how the brain works and basically how our brain forms these truth towers that we create. And it's an actual neuron that is built in our brain that's saying, okay, like this is truth. And I'm going to believe this, and my life is going to function off this. If you ever have watched Inside Out, the little lands that are in Inside Out is based off this idea that we have these truth towers or these lands that define who we are. And some of those are beautiful, and some of them are not serving us. They're not helpful. And it's actually physically painful to destroy these truth towers. It is emotionally like fraught with all kinds of physical pain to go through a faith crisis, to go through facing your darker self and destroying that or killing that tower. It is a difficult process. But we have these archetypes that tell us and show us that it is absolutely necessary to go through that process. And if you're Christian, then you're familiar with the idea of repentance. And that is that same idea of destroying these truth towers that are not serving us, that aren't actually true, but that we've made. Babies experience this. They will have their mother hold them, and then they believe that their mother is going to hold them and be there for them at all times. And then something happens that destroys that faith, that truth tower, and they literally cry because that truth tower has just been destroyed. You can watch the neurons break apart and reform in a situation like that with a baby. It's fascinating. Our brains are so fascinating. And so I think that that's interesting connections. I think that something else that I love about this story is Inanna's friendship and how she prepares for the descent. I feel like a lot of people that get stuck in the descent or end up dying in the underworld, they didn't have that community to help them. To talk to a friend and just like process through something that's very difficult and hard and be able to be open and vulnerable and have that support system, that can make all of the difference. All of the difference. And maybe it's not a friend. Maybe it's a therapist. I mean, a therapist probably would be a better choice, honestly. You have the
Yeah.
resources. But we need community. We are not meant to make these descents on our own. We are not meant to go on these healing journeys all by ourselves. We need our friends. We need our divine team to assist us. And through my experience, I feel like the most profound changes that are going to happen in your life will happen by those divine beings, by divine intervention. And it does take us a huge amount of faith to believe that that is possible. But I mean, there's a reason why AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, believes that you have to believe in a God, because there's not a more powerful force than something divine that can inspire you and remind you who you truly are, and can feed you that bread of life and that water of life, and restore you to, and transfigure you and metamorphosize you into something even better. And so seeking for those experiences, I think, is really important.
Yeah,
Making
seeking for
opportunity
divine experiences, so important. Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think also divinity is all around you. You know, the divine is so close to us. It's so much closer than we think. I think personally, I really believe we are surrounded by angels all the time. And even nature is so divine, right? That alone time, there's a reason that mountains are used as temples and these beautiful spaces, that the earth has a beautiful spirit and it helps us and it's there for us. And there are people who want to help us. And I think it's just interesting, that community piece being so important, right? But also stepping into that divine community piece, like your divine team is so helpful, because like you said, they help you transfigure, right? You get that deep transformation, you become something else. And I think that's just so beautiful. Sorry, I kind of interrupted you. Was there something else you wanted to say?
Well, something else I was going to say is that incorporating, like making space for these types of opportunities to have the divine reach into your heart and weed out all the things that are not serving you. There are lots of different ways to make that space. When I first started out, it was like just meditation, expecting to see visions. I mean, honestly, it like sounds weird coming out of my mouth, but like literally I wanted to see God. I wanted to like have Christ come next to me and help heal me. I wanted to like experience the divine, because if there was anyone that I could believe, it was that. If there was anything that could change me and truly make an impact, it was that. And that did make that difference. And now, like, I have other things that I do. I actually hike every week in the mountains. And I mean, like, I call it my temple visit. I go on my weekly temple visit, my ascent into the mountains, and I use that as a healing opportunity. I mean, there have been times when I go on a hike and it's just like I'm listening to a book and whatever, but there are times when I'm like, I am in a descent right now. Like, I am going to use this to heal. And man, I try to, if it's one of those ones, I try to choose a trail that's like less traveled, because I'm usually bawling my eyes out the whole way up and like dragging on the ground. Like, not only am there's something about hiking up a mountain that's already physically exhausting and hurts, to like really cleanse out all of the emotional hurt that you're experiencing. And our beautiful Mother Earth, she takes all of that. She takes all of that pain and she sucks it into her core and she composts it and turns it into something beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Totally. Yeah, she does a great job. And I think those are great practices. I think some more practical things like you talked about, I think journaling is a huge tool for these descents and ascents and for integrating back into ourselves. Writing, like you said, hiking, meditating. I think creating sacred space is incredibly important. Making your home sacred to you, making a small space. And that can be done a number of ways. It doesn't have to be a big thing. You don't have to be a perfect housekeeper. It really can come from, right, just cleaning a little bit of space, pushing a little bit of space, and even just imagining a circle around you, or, putting things around you to make it sacred, or just saying to yourself in an intention, now this room is sacred. This place,
Yes.
this space is sacred. And there, like I said, there's so many ways you could do that, but just having that intention can make all the difference in processing and helping you to integrate and giving yourself a real space to have these visions you're talking about, to have these spiritual experiences. Something that they do in Japan. I lived in Japan as a teen, and everybody in Japan has altars in their house. Everybody does. And it's so funny because, we talk about that. If you're part of a Judeo-Christian religion, right, you read about altars in the Old Testament and things like that, but you never would consider like having an altar in your house, And not that everyone has to have an altar, but I do think this beautiful idea of creating a sacred space that you can go to in your home is so important. A set apart space for yourself, and just making that time in that room. And that's what I loved about their homes, is they always kept all their ancestors on their altars, and people during Dia de los Muertos, they do the same thing, right? And it was just this spot of sacredness. And I think bringing that into our own homes can help us be more mindful and just like having intention to have these deep sacred experiences. Do you have any other like thoughts or suggestions on that?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I think there was a period of time where like I didn't feel like I had a space that could be that for me, with so many little kids crawling around. Sometimes that space has to be a time of day that is untouched by little people. For instance, I had a period of time where I was waking up really early, and I would like lock my door, and then I would go in my closet, and I would also close the door and like block it and sit on the ground, and I would just have like my hour of like, this is my intentional sacred time. This is my sacred space. I expect to connect with God right now. And it's important to understand, make sure that you can have those experiences. I like clearing out any fear, clearing out things that might be inhibiting those types of experiences, understanding a little bit of energy work, understanding how to be more intuitive and how to connect with the divine. I think those are important skills to develop, to start having those types of experiences. So even if like your sacred time is to study something like the emotion code, which is a really great beginner place to start, of like understanding like how to get intuitive messages, how to tap into your body and get answers and clarity and trust your intuition. I think that's a really great place to start, is understanding that those kinds of answers are available to you, and developing the tools to get those types of answers.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think we've done a very good job in society demonizing our bodies, but our bodies are so essential for our growth and our intuition. And I think as women, particularly as the bringer, that we are keepers of the body, and that we bring forth these beautiful bodies and act as that veil. And just being, I think a part of this is being willing to be in your body, being willing to feel the sensations of your body, being willing to make peace with it, because sometimes we're very much fighting with our bodies and we do not like them,
Yeah. I mean, I definitely have years that like I was not inside of my body. And when I say that, what I mean is like my spirit, like my eternal spirit that is there to help guide me and lead me in life, could not even be inside of, like, be present with me, because I was in so much pain that it was impossible for her to even like stand with me and be with me and support me and help me. And so that's what I kind of mean by like be in your body. I think that term, unless you are conscious of it and have experienced it, it's hard to understand what we could possibly be talking about. But yeah, I think that something that always helped me during that time when I was out of my body was doing yoga. I did yoga for several years, and that was like the only time that I felt any kind of relief from like all of the pain that I was experiencing, emotional pain that I was experiencing. And I would walk out just feeling so refreshed and like rejuvenated and like functioning so much better. And so I think that that is a spiritual practice, is moving your body in ways that help clear out and create alignment in order for you to be present.
Yeah, I think physical activity, again, and I think it's very easy to slip out of your body because we're on our computers or our phones all the time, on Instagram. We're always in our heads. We're just thinking. We have this reel. We're not connecting to ourselves, and we're very sedentary. And so, and I think, like you said, movement can be sacred. Adding that to your life can be sacred. And I think it's very important, especially for women, to have a piece of that. That doesn't have to be anything huge. It doesn't have to be big. It could be simple yoga. It could be a walk. It could be anything small that you want to do, but it can really reconnect women back to themselves.
Yeah, I think that even if you have a hard relationship with exercise, like if you turn any kind of physical movement into like a spiritual practice, that can really help eliminate resistance. And also like for me, that has been extremely helpful to be able to like go hike. And honestly, like especially if I'm like processing through rage or something really, really hard, like that experience of like hiking up a very steep hill and it being like my lungs are burning, like my legs hurt, like everything is painful. Like that's a great time to get some rage out.
Yes, that's so true. Sacred rage right there.
Yeah, exactly. And to like just like give it to God, give it to the earth, like let it out and process through that, like let the tears fall to the ground. Those have been the most beautiful experiences that I've had in the mountains are those ones. And I can distinctly remember many of them that really helped me make a huge amount of progress in my life and like release really difficult, hard things.
I think that's beautiful. Well, Meg, is there any last thoughts you have about Inanna's descent? Anything you want to connect for the audience or leave the audience with at this time?
I think just at the end, I would say, like, I think it's important to seek out and develop relationships with individual members of a divine team. To start creating those relationships, you are meant to have intimate relationships with divine beings from the other side of the veil. If there's one thing I believe, that is the one thing I believe more than anything. You have a mother who is on that side, the other side of the veil, who wants you to come to her so that she can wrap you up in her love. She wants to be a part of your life. She wants to teach you. She wants to mother you. She wants to hold you. She wants to tell you how much she adores you no matter what. Like, she is amazing. Absolutely incredible. And a huge resource for everything that you need in your life. She will ignite a fire and birth beautiful things into your life if you're willing to like get to know her and develop a relationship with her. It is absolutely incredible. And also maybe a little warning too. There are also other forces out there that are there to distract you, to impede your development, to stop you from obtaining the full measure of your creation, and to become more aware of those adversarial forces that are maybe active in your life and learn how to avoid them, learn how to protect yourself from them, learn how to turn to the light and have faith, to rid yourself of fear that opens up the gates to those forces. I think those are important things to do. And I would encourage all of your listeners to take that path, because those things are real. They are as real as you and I talking right now. They're just not visually apparent to us, but they are absolutely spiritually apparent to us when we are able to open our eyes of our hearts and see them. So
thank you so much for that. Thank you for those beautiful words. Thank you for giving us our time today and telling us and teaching us. It's so wonderful. If people want to connect with you, where would you like them to do that?
yeah, so definitely look at our podcast, the In Her Image podcast. In fact, we did an amazing series. It's like a 4-part series about Inanna with Pam England. And so if you are interested in learning more about that, about Inanna and all the different gates and all of the things that she put on, we break that all down in a really deep way. It's very beautiful. I suggest listening to that podcast. And that's really the best way to get a hold of me. I am not very active on social media. I avoid it at all costs. So our podcast is the best place to get a hold of me. If you want to have a personal conversation with me, I will give my number to Julie and you can email her and we can text. I'm happy to have a personal conversation with people. I'm not trying to avoid that by any means, but because I'm not active on social media, it does kind of prohibit that sometimes. So, yeah.
Well, Meg, you are so great. Thank you so much for being here. I will link the podcast in the show notes as well as your Instagram, the In Her Image podcast Instagram. And just thank you so much for your time. And thank you, everybody, for listening. We'll see you next week.
Thanks so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we did. Please make sure to give us a 5-star rating wherever you are listening and share with someone you know. See you next week.